Welcome to the Smartcast. I am Michael Zarathis Cook, Chief Editor of Smart Magazine. Thank you for joining us as we relaunch our podcast platform. I am incredibly excited to be doing so with a great interview with Jason Mraz, who is an artist that almost needs no introduction, and also very excited to announce that he will be the cover artist for our next issue, issue 12, which will be out this July. So please stay tuned for more information on how to get a copy of that. And I gotta be honest that as I was sort of thinking who it is I wanted to be on the cover of this issue or to be our feature artist for this issue, I was a bit reticent about making it a pop artist. And of course, no issues with pop artists. We cover them all the time. And we're incredibly proud that we can be a publication that on one hand features visual artists, painters, sculptors, opera singers, orchestral musicians, ballet dancers, and also any other artists you can think of out there in terms of pop artists, folk artists, punk artists. We'll cover it if it's good, frankly. That's my stance on who it is that ends up being in the magazine. But in terms of making the feature artist a pop artist, I was a bit reticent about making that choice Jason, mostly because we tend to lean more towards sort of the alt side of things when it comes to music. We like artists that are sort of pushing the boundaries in terms of the genre spaces that they work in. And so a pop artist is not the first thing that comes to mind there. But there was just something about this album that Jason has just released called Magical Rhythmical Radical Ride. And look, you're going to get tired of hearing me and him say it through this episode. I'm sorry about that. That's, them's the breaks. But there was something about the album title. There's something about hearing him talk to other people about it. And some of the songs, the lyrics, the music videos for this album that just, it felt like he was trying to do something new. He felt like he was pushing the boundaries. It felt like here's this man who, frankly, very privileged through his life in terms of what he's been able to do in his career. And if he decided to just coast on his success in the past, who could blame him for that? He could have just phoned it in on his next album and it'll probably still do really well. Yet, he's still out there. He's still sort of going back to the basics, going back to what excites him as a musician, going back to what people who've known him for a long time might want to hear differently from him. And he's also sort of returning to the material on his breakout album, We Sing, We Dance, We Steal Things, that obviously feature the song I'm Yours that, everyone and their cousin knows. And all of this put together signified to me that something was happening here that I think would be very fluent and simpatico with what we do as a publication. The folks who are familiar with Smart Magazine that have been following us for the last 3 years tend to see us as a publication that goes out there, tries to find musicians that are either up and coming or just doing crazy things with their overall output, or just musicians that live on the edge of their genre. So the choice to have Jason on this cover might seem a bit out of place with that. But what I'm hoping you'll hear in this interview is how both out of his usual element and into a new and refurbished element Jason is, how incredibly thoughtful he is in terms of the music he's making, in terms of what inspired that music, the internal sort of changes that he's going through that engendered some of the songs and the overall concept on this album. It's a really fun album to listen to. The music videos are really fun to watch. So I'm definitely grateful to Jason and his team for making time for Smart Magazine, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation that you're about to listen to, and also check out the album. It was released on June 23rd, so by the time you're listening to this, it's definitely available at record stores, on Spotify, Apple Music, and anywhere that you can find music. This conversations and the many, many conversations that you will find in issue 12 are part of our commitment to independent arts journalism within Canada and also just across the world. We aspire to be global in our coverage, but also keep a very sort of local perspective in the conversations that we're having, especially when it comes to how the art that we're covering reverberates in the immediate community around it. So we deeply appreciate your readership. We deeply appreciate you listening to this podcast and sharing it with your friends and so on. And Smart Magazine would not be possible without the support of listeners and readers like you. So here are 3 simple ways that you can continue to support the work that we do. The easiest way costs you nothing. If this was a decade ago, I could say it costs you just a cup of coffee, but our digital copies are $1.99, and good luck finding a cup of coffee for $1.99 these days. But that's exactly it. Any one of our digital copies you can find at smartbylighthouse.com or in the description of wherever you're watching or listening to this video. You could buy for $1.99. If you are more of a print person, which I certainly hope you are, then also on the website, you can find us in print. Issues 7 to 11 are all available in print, starting at $17.99. And I'm pretty sure there's a coffee shop near you that would sell you a cup of coffee with all the works for $17.99. And if you really love what we do, you've been following us for a couple of issues now, you've read a couple of articles that connected with you, then please subscribe to Smart Magazine. You'll get issues 9, 10, 11, 12 in July and 13 after that, and a free copy of issue 7 just for $79. And I was so tempted to make another joke about how you'll be able to find a $79 cup of coffee around you, but I think I'll rise above the low-hanging fruits and just sincerely ask you to support what we do in any way that you can, whether it's with buying a copy either digitally or in print, or just liking, sharing, and subscribing to our various platforms. And you can start that by sharing this conversation you're about to hear with Jason Mraz with anyone else that you think would appreciate both the kinds of questions and conversations that we host and also the music that he makes. Congrats on Mystical, Magical, Rhythmical, Radical Ride. And it's funny because on your social media, you've been saying, try saying that 5 times. But even just now, I'm struggling to say that once. So it's definitely a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, and as albums and songs should be. I mean, we invite the listener into a magical world of melody and rhythm and patterns and playfulness. And I wanted the album to really be wrapped in that on the cover so you know what you're getting yourself into when you open it up. And to say mystical, magical, rhythmical, radical ride is really just a way of saying life. But if I said life, that would just be too short, and it would remind us that life is short. And how are we just given one syllable to sum up life? So I say mystical, magical, rhythmical, radical ride to remind me of this cosmic, fantastic voyage that we get to experience in this precious life.
You know what's funny though? Two things I went looking for when I saw this album when you announced it. The first one was Ride by Bill Hicks. He has this bit. If you've never heard it, I would absolutely recommend it. But he talks
Great.
about how life is going on a ride, and
Oh my gosh. I love Bill Hicks. Who knows?
yeah,
Maybe subliminally it lives in my head. I'm gonna
exactly.
look it up.
It's so simpatico with just you're right. Like it's ridiculous that we only have one syllable for ride. And then the other thing that I went looking for was this one's definitely left field, but it's the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which is like this film. Do you
Sure.
know it?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is again a film about just the ridiculousness of life. It's got Johnny Depp in it and a whole bunch of just random Hollywood stars
Uh,
in it. When you chose the title for We Sing, We Dance, We Steal, which this present album is a huge callback to, it was inspired by a cartoon from Scottish artist David Shrigley. I'm wondering, was there a more sort of specific inspiration to choosing Mystical, Magical, Rhythmical, Radical Ride as the title, or did you just like the way those words sounded in the song Disco Sun?
Right. So, yeah, the album had been made and I still didn't have a title for it, which was challenging. When I made We Sing, We Dance, We Steal Things, I had the title before I went into the studio. And so that was always sort of a guidepost for us, though I never worked that lyric or that song title or that album title into a song. This time around, I had a lot of ideas for titles, but nothing was sticking. And so once it was mixed and mastered and I'm listening to it and kind of trying to get a vibe for the title. That line stood out to me. It's kind of right in the middle of the album. And the thing about that lyric is it's not really a premeditated lyric. It's not something I labored over for weeks or months. Some song lyrics arrive when you need them, when you've written the lyric before that line. And so in Disco Sun, it's the third verse, it's a rap verse, and I'm saying it's only natural to get down low like an animal and kiss the ground that you're walking on because it's a miracle that we're here at all. On this mystical, magical, rhythmical, radical ride. And honestly, when I wrote the song back in 2019, that lyric was very challenging, and I thought it was a little much for that verse. And honestly, even when I would sing it last summer, the lyric was challenging, but I'm so glad it remained because it really does fit this album well, which is a look through time forwards and backwards. It's a ride of rhythms and so on. And suddenly that lyric, which made me very nervous in a song, makes me very excited that it's in the song. Now when I sing Disco Sun, it has a different energy about it because it's part of the network, the neural network of this album.
I love that neural network of this album. That's such a beautiful way to put it. On the cover of the album, which is a really sort of very apropos cover, it's a summer album, it's a very extroverted album, etc. One of the sort of subtly prevalent things is your tattoo beginner, which, people who watched I'm Yours 15 years ago, that tattoo flashes a couple of times in the music video for I'm Yours. And, I think the interesting thing is how the meaning of that tattoo has probably changed for you. How back then at the start of your career, or relatively early end of your career, you were beginning a lot of new things, but now you're sort of beginning again. So I'm curious how that meaning has evolved for you and what it means now to be a beginner.
Well, it's definitely a state of mind, and I may have evolved and the tattoo has not, which is great because I got the tattoo many years ago when I first started surfing. I felt like such a beginner, and all the higher level surfers out there were telling me to get out of the way, go to a different wave. And I just thought, I'm a beginner. Like, give me a shot. Everybody was a beginner once. Let me out there. So I wished that I'd had a t-shirt that said beginner on it so everyone in the ocean knew to look out for the beginners. And anytime I did spot the beginners, they were having more fun. All the serious surfers were very serious about it, and very competitive. But the beginners didn't know any difference between a good wave, a bad wave, a good day, bad day. Beginners were having more fun. And so rather than a t-shirt, I decided I'll just get it tattooed on my arm and do my best in this life to maintain a beginner's mind, which is always a great place to come from in any project. It reminds me to have fun. It reminds me that even though I may have done this before, I've not done it this way before. I've not done it at this age before. Maybe I've not done it in this studio before. By keeping a beginner's mind, there's always ways to view something you've done in a new light. I actually forgot that the tattoo was seen in I'm Yours video. Thank you for that reminder. But when we took this photo, in a way, I wasn't really ready for it. And they took the photo, and my band, everyone looked at it and said, that's going to be the album cover before I even had a chance to say anything or even see it. And I was a little shy about having my tattoo exposed. But then it became, for a minute, the idea was beginner might be the album title. Beginner might be a way to say we're starting over and this is something new. I'm dabbling in maybe dance or disco for the first time. Unfortunately, beginner didn't stick as a title, but thank you for recognizing that it is on the cover and I do carry it with me as a badge of honor. For the rest of my life, I'll always be a beginner.
And the title that you ended up going with, I think captures more so the spirit of this album, which is it's about the cyclical return of time rather than just beginning. It's about coming back to something. In this case, the same producer, for example, 15 years after you guys first collaborated on an album that sort of helped launch your career. But speaking of writing and speaking of starting something for the first time, I think you took up rollerblading recently. How's that going? Are you satisfied with how much you've mastered it?
Yes and no. So I loved to skate ever since I was a little kid. I started on quad skates, that's two by two, four wheels under your feet, roller skates. And I did it a lot as a kid. And in high school, it got away from me. I started to do other things and other hobbies, interests. And I did get into rollerblading my senior year of high school, and I did it a lot during college. I would find myself going out on errands for roommates and suite mates who needed libations and snacks. I could throw on my rollerblades and cruise around the city and grab everything I needed and bring it back for everyone in the dorm. That I remember. And so a couple of years ago, some friends had a birthday party at a roller rink, and I went for the nostalgia of it all, but when I put the skates on my feet, something unlocked, and it all came back. I knew that I could do this as a kid, and I could still ride the bike, if you will, and it then became something that I started to practice more during the pandemic when touring was canceled, and I would skate in my driveway, and I found an outdoor hockey rink in my community, and I would go and skate and just pick up speed and meet other skaters and learn various skate dances, and it just became a thing that what I realized never really went anywhere. It's that I left skating, but skating has always been there, so it's back. I love it. Will I skate forever? I don't know. There are so many things I wanna get my hands on, but I will say we do have a fabulous music video coming out for Feel Good 2 that is roller skate themed, so that was very exciting to create.
Sort of onto the rhythmical side of things in this album. This is definitely your most pop album so far. It's incredibly danceable and it's symphonic at parts, at least the instrumentation. And it just has a really sort of athletic beat to most of it that is very poppy. And on this note, I want to talk about your mom, which I know
Yeah,
is is a bit of a tangent. But first of all, this album is being released on June 23rd, which is also your birthday. Is that a
very auspicious day, yeah.
yeah, is that a coincidence or just sort of clever marketing on your end?
It feels like a coincidence for me when it was proposed to me, that would be a great date/weekend for our release, and I raised my hand, love that day, let's do it. I can definitely put a lot of energy around that.
Your mom, whose name is also obviously June, had a hand in the way that this album sounds. You played her some acoustic demos and she responded with, quote, "Yeah, these are great, but y'all need to make a pop album because you're not getting any younger and you
You
better be
sounded
able."
exactly like her. Yeah.
For some reason, I just picture she has like a glass of wine in hand as she's saying this, just swirling it around and like, I'm not feeling the sound. It needs to more drum beats. Why do you think that resonated with you? Like that particular comment or that approach in general, not just about her, but this urgency or this sense of, you know what, I just want to make an album that feels good.
Well, I definitely like to ask friends, listeners, fans, and parents, what do you want to hear? What do you like? Of the things I have made or the things I'm currently making, here's an example. What do you like? And I don't think there's anyone in the world that you want to please more than your mother. So
Yeah.
when she just laid it out, y'all need to make a pop album because you're not getting any younger. That struck me first because she had to do the age dig there and remind me that I'm catching up to her in age, and that also it was a keen awareness that even though I've been in the pop lane and I've done up-tempo numbers in the past, it didn't resonate with my mom that I had truly achieved it yet, and so I took that to heart, and I set a new goal for myself to see if I could make something that even she would like, but that still lives in sort of a contemporary dance genre. So thanks, mom, and she was a great resource in the studio, and of course, my band, everyone knows my mom and loves her, and so whenever we'd be stumped or be at a fork in the road, should we go this way or should we go this way? We would basically say, "Well, what would June do?" or "What would June want us to do?" And we would always lean in the direction of June's pop request. And I think the result was great, and I'm really glad we had that, and that with the aid of Martin Terefe and a few of our add-on studio musicians, Sterling Campbell, who sat in on drums for a few songs, and Nikolai Torp, who loaned us some beautiful keyboard parts. Glenn Scott played some great keyboard parts, and even Oliver Liu, who was our engineer, was just so fresh and scrappy and edgy with his style of sort of engineering and file gathering that it added to the fun and flavor of pop, which sometimes pop needs to still feel like it's on the fringe. It needs to be familiar, but it also still needs to feel fresh. And I feel like we had all those right ingredients on this. But I don't know that I would have looked for them had June not really made that request. Thanks, Mom.
One of the undertones of this album is a sort of freedom of expression. especially for you. And then this frame of thought, I'm looking at the radical side of this album, particularly you sort of unconfining yourself from traditional masculinity,
Mm.
which is something that you've been conscious about over the last little while. What's interesting here is that you're a man in your 40s that's choosing to consciously create space for queer expression, for free, just exuberant expression in life in general. And sort of this particular video is an expression of your masculinity that's liberated and also liberating as a viewer. So I'm curious what your journey has been over the last 5 years, for example, in terms of defining and redefining your masculinity.
I don't know that I'm defined yet. I think and nor am I refined. And I don't ever want to be final, but I love being in the flow. I grew up with a lot of queer friends, and I had an amazing manager for 18 years who was a gay man, and many queer managers inside that office. And through all of those years from high school and into my adult life, I noticed that there was still, and still today, I mean, we're seeing many states across the country ban books and materials and education. And even in some states, you can't even talk about that gay even exists. And so, feeling that, I wanted to make sure that I'm making art that creates a space for that to counteract all the opposition we're still experiencing in the world, so that queer presence, queer love can still bloom, blossom, and flourish in this world. My own experiences are evolving and expanding. I've always been somewhat of an independent, and I did for many years chase an institutional idea of marriage. And I need to admit that that didn't last, it didn't work. And I got a divorce and found myself single again and realized that I was not chasing things that my heart wanted. I was chasing things that I think my mom wanted, or that an ideal was taught to me. And these are the very things that make me nervous about the book bans and the bills that are showing up around the country. Is they're going to force these ideals into young people's minds that aren't their calling, that don't meet their view of love and relationship and family. So I know this firsthand, right? I grew up in an area, even though I had queer friends, it was, you had to be very brave to be out, or you had to leave town, you know? And so it took me a very long time to explore that side of myself and to accept that side of myself. And today I find myself as a bi man. Sometimes I call myself, I'm a cis pan man, because I can really, my heart is open. And I love making connections with all kinds of people. And sometimes those connections are intimate. Sometimes those connections are just long lasting, beautiful pen pals. I'm an artist, and I need a muse. And I love finding them all over the place. So, yeah, I did want to be a little more conscious about inclusivity going forward in my work. And it's also exciting for me to finally be exploring that in my work, whereas I might have been afraid to do it 20 years ago.
Beautifully, beautifully put. The magical side of this for me is definitely the aesthetic of the visual concept of the album, which has a very sort of retro 1970s feel to it. Looks like you've time traveled to the 70s, especially in Pancakes and Butter, which is set in a surreal 70s variety show. There is an element of nostalgia there, but it seems it's more for what I think of as like an unplugged connectedness of that era of the 70s. In the video for I Feel Like Dancing, there's a shot of people playing Cards Against Humanity around a poker table. I think it's Cards Against Humanity, I could
Yeah,
be
it
wrong.
is. Yeah.
But the screens are all static in that shot, which is such a beautiful way to just summarize connected people in real life, but disconnected from technology. I just want to know what sort of inspired this callback to the
Mm.
70s and the aesthetic creation of this album for you.
Well, certainly for us to find the disco grooves and the feel that we got, first of all, I love the 70s as a recorded genre of music, because whether it was their microphones, their recording technology, their instruments, the rise of the Rhodes and electric pianos, the rise of synthesizers. There's just a warmth and a beauty to how music was recorded in that decade. But then specifically, we're listening to Bee Gees, ABBA, Nile Rodgers productions from Chic all the way up to more current like Daft Punk. And so I just feel like maybe the origin of great dance music comes from that era, the 70s. The videos, it's interesting that you made that connection that there is a bit of nostalgia in them because I was still trying to make them feel very modern. The music to connect community and family, playing cards to connect family. It's interesting how it's entertaining almost. It's almost idyllic to see a family sitting around playing cards instead of seeing a family sitting around staring at their phones, which is pretty common. We play Cards Against Humanity when we go hang with my mom, my siblings and I, and we hang with my mom, and she just loves that game because my mom does not use language, but that game forces her to use crazy language, and she just loves it. She gets so embarrassed, she laughs a lot, and so it's a way that we can connect as a family on a level that's just way deeper than us sending links of TikToks that we like. The videos are a way to try to create a world that's more magical than just the three-dimensional world we live in. The music can maybe become a fourth dimension to add to that. Videos give us that same opportunity to take reality and then sweeten it a little. Like, what would be sweeter in this version of reality? And so that's what we got to do.
I'm going a bit backwards here.
It's okay.
We started with Ride, the radical, the rhythmical, and obviously just talked about the magical side of things in terms of, a certain amount of time traveling. So that leaves us with the mystical
Mhm.
component of this. For me, that's a conversation about weed, of all things,
Hey!
which has nothing to do with the album, but perhaps it might. You shared on social media recently how you were arrested 20 years ago, approximately,
Mm,
for being in possession of a small amount of weed and how it could have easily ruined your life. And in fact, for a lot of people of color, that does ruin your life. I've lost
yeah.
quite a few friends from high school to
Oh,
just like a small ounce or two of weed. And all of a sudden, your life takes on this entirely different trajectory.
yeah.
Here in Canada, it's legal. Hopefully that changes for you guys as well in the States. But I'm curious, what do you think people who are against a nationwide legalization tend to get wrong about the fact that this is just something that grows naturally out of the earth? Anything can be harmful, even the water I'm drinking here, if, in the right circumstance. What do you think people tend to get wrong about smoking weed and weed culture in general?
I think they get it wrong that it's this all-consuming, overtaking drug. That's what we were taught as kids in our, drug awareness prevention programs as kids, and it even predates my age. Early 1970s, they started rebranding cannabis to be this marijuana, this thing that's on the streets, that's overtaking minds and destroying families. And so what we get wrong about it is we've made it a monster on paper. We made it a monster in the media. And because of that, we made laws that have, like you said, completely changed lives, destroyed lives. When when what we should have is reverence and respect for the plant because it is a naturally occurring, naturally growing plant. That if you just let it grow, it would seed itself and probably cover this whole continent like a weed, the way weeds naturally do. They spread seeds and keep propagating themselves. But the one thing we do with plants, with other plants, is we honor them, respect them. We know how to use them in certain quantities. We know how to use them in certain recipes, ingredients, and concoctions. And we learn our dosage with things. We've done it with chemicals like chlorine. We know the dosage, the right amount of dosage to put in our water so that water is clean. Thanks to that miracle recipe, humans started living longer. We all used to die in our 30s because water was poisoned. With alcohol, we know our limits. So for some reason, unfortunately, marijuana got painted as this evil monster, as this villain, and it was by design. It was to continue to keep marginalized people in the margins. It was continued to fill the prisons in the United States, especially so that labor could remain free and people could remain enslaved. I mean, the list goes on why marijuana was possibly made a bad guy or a bad species. And so I think it's ridiculous that any species on God's green earth should be made illegal. If anything comes out of this earth, we should honor it, respect it, ask what it is and how it can be used to help us. You
Yeah,
know, yeah, and we're seeing it with mushrooms now. We're understanding the value of the mycelial network and all of the potent medicinal qualities from a myriad of mushroom varieties. And I think cannabis is in that same family then, and we'll discover those things the more we have time to research it.
fantastic, fantastic. And these things just exist to help take you on a ride, right? It makes life easier.
Yeah, it makes life easier. I mean, if you do it in really small doses,
Yeah.
it doesn't completely alter your reality, but it enhances your reality so that we can maintain communication, smiles, dreaming, creativity, compassion, especially compassion. And obviously, if you take it in larger doses, eventually you will be drunk with compassion. You'll be, on a completely different trip. But that too is to be respected.